Tonight, you might take a small pill before bed or reach for something in a drawer. You barely think about it. It feels modern. It feels like a product of laboratories and pharmacies in the 20th century. But the real answer is far stranger. Humans have been trying to control when they have children for almost as long as they have been human. Not for decades, not for centuries, for thousands of years. And the story of how they did it says less about biology than it does about what it means to be a person trying to control your own future. Start in Egypt, 4,000 years ago. Archaeologists digging near the ancient city of Lahun found a medical papyrus, now called the Kahun Gynecological Papyrus. It is one of the oldest medical documents ever recovered. Inside it, alongside instructions for treating a wandering womb and easing childbirth, there is a recipe: crocodile dung mixed with fermented paste inserted before intercourse. It sounds absurd today, but look closer, and it is not. Fermented dung is acidic. Acidic environments are hostile to sperm. The women who wrote this down, or the healers who passed it between generations, may not have known why it worked, but they had noticed that it did, at least sometimes. This was not superstition dressed up as medicine. This was trial and error, refined over centuries, the same method every science eventually uses. Move forward a few hundred years to another Egyptian document, the Ebers Papyrus. It describes a different approach: a plug of lint soaked in a mixture of honey and acacia gum placed inside the body before sex. Historian John Riddle, who spent much of his career studying ancient contraception, pointed out something remarkable about acacia. When it ferments, it produces lactic acid, the same compound found in modern spermicidal gels. Ancient women were not guessing blindly. They were running their own long, uncontrolled experiments, one household at a time, one generation at a time. And some of those experiments worked. Why does this surprise you? Maybe because you were taught that history moves in one direction, that people got smarter and more capable as time went on, that ancient people were guided by fear and myth, waiting for science to arrive and rescue them from ignorance. But that is not what the evidence shows. Across the ancient Mediterranean, one plant became so valuable for exactly this purpose that it appeared on coins. Silphium, a relative of fennel, grew only in a narrow strip of land near the ancient city of Cyrene, in what is now Libya. Writers from Rome and Greece described it as a treatment to prevent pregnancy and to end one already begun. Demand for it was so high and its growing region so limited that by the 1st century it had vanished. Historians still debate the details, but the outline is clear enough. An entire population once relied so heavily on a plant for reproductive control that they may have driven it to extinction. Think about that for a moment. Somewhere, sometime, women in the ancient world had access to something modern women often do not: a plant-based method reliable enough that people wrote about it, taxed it, and eventually ran out of it. What does that tell you about what ancient people actually knew? The knowledge did not stay in one place. In ancient China, texts described mercury and lead compounds used to prevent pregnancy, dangerous, but evidence of the same underlying drive. In parts of Africa, oral traditions passed down specific plants and roots for the same purpose, knowledge that anthropologists are only now beginning to document properly, often racing against the loss of the elders who still remember it. In India, Ayurvedic texts describe herbal preparations alongside timing methods based on observed cycles. Different continents, different plants, different words for the same idea. Humans, independently, again and again, working out how to separate sex from consequence. Here is where it gets stranger still. Anthropologist Norman Himes, writing in the 1930s, tried to trace contraceptive practices across as many cultures as he could document, and he found something that unsettled the assumptions of his own era. He found that so-called primitive societies were not, in fact, ignorant about reproduction. Many had detailed, functional knowledge passed down through generations of women, knowledge that was frequently dismissed by colonial observers who assumed such societies could not possibly understand their own biology. That dismissal was not just wrong. It erased a body of accumulated human intelligence that had taken thousands of years to build. Why did this knowledge exist at all? Why would ancient societies, which needed labor, which needed children to survive famine and war and disease, also develop tools to prevent pregnancy? Because survival was never just about having more children. It was about timing. A woman recovering from one birth in a world with no modern medicine could die from having another too soon. A family already stretched thin by drought could not always feed one more mouth. Spacing pregnancies was not a luxury. In many cases, it was the difference between a family's survival and its collapse. This is the part that gets lost when you imagine ancient people as passive, at the mercy of their own biology. They were not passive. They were negotiating with it, constantly, using whatever tools their environment gave them. Some of those tools were physical. Barrier methods appear across cultures in different forms. Sea sponges soaked in vinegar in ancient Greece, described by physicians like Soranus of Ephesus, who wrote one of the most detailed surviving medical texts on the subject in the 2nd century. Soranus distinguished between substances meant to prevent conception and those meant to end an existing pregnancy, a distinction that shows a level of conceptual sophistication easy to underestimate today. Other tools were behavioral. Extended breastfeeding, which can suppress ovulation, was practiced across many ancient societies, sometimes for years. Whether or not the biological mechanism was understood, the pattern, more nursing, fewer pregnancies, was observed and repeated, and some tools were almost certainly about timing intercourse itself, tracking cycles through observation long before anyone understood hormones or ovulation in the way you do now. None of these methods were perfect. Many failed. Some were dangerous. This is not a story about ancient people quietly possessing modern medicine in disguise. It is a story about persistence, about a problem that mattered enough to keep working on, generation after generation, with imperfect tools and incomplete understanding, because the alternative, having no control at all, was worse. By the time you reach the medieval period, this knowledge had scattered and specialized. Islamic physicians like Al-Razi and Ibn Sina, writing medical texts between the 9th and 11th centuries, cataloged dozens of substances believed to prevent conception, drawing on Greek, Persian, and Indian sources, synthesizing centuries of accumulated observation into structured medical writing. Some of what they recorded was inert. Some, modern researchers have found, had genuine pharmacological activity. This is the thread that connects a papyrus in Egypt to a pill in your bathroom cabinet. Not a single invention. Not one brilliant discovery. A long, uneven, cross-cultural accumulation of trial, error, observation, and survival, stretching back further than most people ever imagine. So when did ancient humans start trying to control reproduction? The honest answer is, as early as you have written records to check, and probably long before that. The Kahun Papyrus is 4,000 years old, and it does not describe a new idea. It describes an established practice, already familiar enough to be written down as standard medical knowledge. Whatever came before writing is lost to you, but there is no reason to think the impulse began there. Every society that has ever faced the basic mathematics of survival, too many mouths, not enough food, a mother too weak to survive another birth, has had a reason to seek this kind of control. What changed over time was not the desire. It was the tools. Crocodile dung gave way to acacia gum, which gave way to soaked sponges, which gave way eventually to latex and then to synthetic hormones engineered in a lab. The materials became more reliable. The underlying human project did not change at all. Tonight, when you take that small pill or reach for something in that drawer, you are not doing something new. You are doing something ancient, dressed in modern packaging. A woman in Lahun, 4,000 years ago, mixing dung and fermented paste by candlelight, was solving the exact same problem you are, with the exact same goal, to decide, for herself, when her body would carry the next chapter of her life. The tools changed. The question never did.